What's up, my comic comrades? The Rings of Power series has returned us to Middle-earth, and while there's a lot we know about Tolkien's world because of the movies, the mythology he created is insanely rich and deep, so there's a ton that many people don't know. With that in mind, we're going to give you some of the lesser known aspects of Middle-earth and Tolkien's world that we think you should know. So let's do this thing. The first thing you need to know about Middle-earth is that while all of the Lord of the Rings stories revolve around the men, elves, and hobbits who live in its lands, Middle-earth is only one of two primary continents within Tolkien's version of Earth, which is called Arda. The other landmass is Aman and sits to the west of Middle-earth. It is also the original home of Valinor, the birthplace of the elves, which is why throughout the stories and movies you hear the elves refer to the West or the Undying Lands. It's also the home of the Valar, which leads us to our next fact. Middle-earth and all of Arda was created by Uru through the music of the Ainur. Uru Ilúvatar is a supreme deity and creator in Tolkien's universe, and the Ainur are the first and most powerful of the beings he created. The strongest of the Ainur are known as the Valar, who entered Arda after its creation and eventually made their home in Valinor. And that, as I mentioned, is also the original birthplace of the elves. Speaking of the elves, that's our next Middle-earth fact. The elves were the first children of Ilúvatar created within Arda. Ilúvatar is the name used by the people of Arda and Middle-earth for Uru. Anyway, while we all know that Middle-earth has elves, you may not know that there are several kindred groups of elves. Kinda like elvish cousins. First you have the Vanyar, who were considered the most beautiful of all elves. Then there's the Noldor, who are highly skilled craftsmen and the greatest warriors. And finally there's the Teleri, who are the greatest seafarers of Middle-earth, even earning the nickname Sea Elves. At this point, most people are familiar with Sauron as the Dark Lord of Middle-earth. But what most people don't know is there was a Dark Lord before him, the first Dark Lord, whose original name was Melkor, although he would become widely known as Morgoth. Morgoth was the originator and source of evil and darkness in the universe, but was originally the most powerful of the Ainur before rebelling against Uru, who once again is the supreme god of the universe. Anyway, Morgoth corrupted and recruited Sauron during his campaign to rule Middle-earth, and Sauron would become the chief of Morgoth's soldiers, which brings us to number 6. So now we know that Sauron was actually a foot soldier for the first Dark Lord and fallen Ainur, Morgoth. But it's also important to know that Sauron was originally one of the Maiar like Gandalf, who were created to help the Valar shape the world of Arda. Yeah, it's a lot and kind of confusing at first, but the key point here is that Gandalf and Sauron are both from the same race of beings who chose very different paths. In fact, there are other corrupted Maiar as well, which became known as Balrogs. The most known being the Balrog of Morgoth, who we see fight Gandalf in the Fellowship of the Ring movie. That's easily one of the best scenes of the trilogy. So many of the characters and places of Middle-earth were brought to life on the big screen by the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies. And the geniuses behind many of the incredible designs that gave Tolkien's stories life were the amazing people at Weta. But some people don't realize that Weta Workshop also creates incredible collectible pieces for many of the projects they work on. And to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they created an incredible classic series line featuring several iconic characters from Middle-earth, including this amazing 1/6 scale Gandalf the Great Pilgrim classic series statue and the 1/6 scale Galadriel of the White Council statue. Weta was kind enough to send these over for us to show you guys in studio, and I'm telling you, these two statues look like they are ripped right off the screen. I think they're some of the most film-accurate collectible statues that I've ever seen. Designed at Weta Workshop in New Zealand, both statues are made of high-quality polystone, and the attention to detail by the artist is just next level. If I saw these in a museum one day for a Lord of the Rings display, I wouldn't be surprised. What I'm saying is, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, these Gandalf and Galadriel statues are pieces that you need in your collection. And you could order them directly from Weta right now by clicking our link in the description. And while you're there, make sure to check out all the other must-have collectibles and prop replicas they've got available. Again, just click our link in the description. So we keep talking about many of the characters in Middle-earth being seafaring, but what are the seas surrounding Middle-earth? You have the sea to the west called Belagir, or the Great Sea, which connects the interior sides of Middle-earth to Aman. The second sea, Akaya, which is found to the east of Middle-earth and is also known as the Encircling Sea. While most of the stories in The Lord of the Rings takes place on land, the seas of Middle-earth play a huge role in its history and mythos, most notably around Círdan the Shipwright, one of the wisest and most adventurous of the ancient elves. We could do a whole episode on him alone, but that's for another day. Have you ever wondered what it would be like in Mordor? Like how hot and muggy it would be? If so, you're not alone, because in 2013, a climate scientist at the University of Bristol conducted a study where he used Tolkien's descriptions of Mordor's environment and climate models to determine if there were any cities in the United States that could match it. Well, after simulating basic systems like wind and rainfall patterns, as well as plant growth, surrounding geology, and average temperature, he landed on one American city that most resembled Mordor. And that would be Los Angeles, California. I mean, I knew the smog was bad, but does that make the Hollywood sign Mount Doom? Probably not, but at least we know what Mordor would be like. As we detailed in our Rings of Power Explained episode, the 7 Rings of Power given to the 7 Dwarf Lords by Sauron allowed them to create 7 powerful dwarf kingdoms. Likewise, the 9 rings given to the mortal men allowed them to build great kingdoms as well. But the greatest of all the kingdoms of men was built before the rings, and its name was Numenor. The Numenorians were massive in stature, and they were masters of architecture and shipbuilding. Their defenses were no joke either, at one point even defeating Sauron's forces. Numenor would have stood for centuries if it weren't for the corruption of its king by Sauron, who convinced them to wage war against Valinor across the sea. The subsequent war led to the demise of Numenor, and you actually see some of its remains portrayed in the Fellowship of the Ring. In The Lord of the Rings, we see Aragorn referred to as one of the Dúnedain. But who exactly are the Dúnedain? Well, they were the descendants of the exiled men of Numenor, led by Elendil and gifted with strength and longevity beyond that of any normal man. After the downfall of Numenor, the Dúnedain broke into 2 groups, the Dúnedain of Arnor and the Dúnedain of Gondor, both of which served in many battles as protectors of the realm, some even doing so as roaming rangers like the chieftain of the Dúnedain and heir of Isildur himself, Aragorn. The last thing we think you need to know about Middle-earth is that the Rings of Power were not the first powerful and coveted artifacts in Tolkien's world. That designation belongs to the silmarils. Also known as the Jewels of Feanor, these 3 crystal-like jewels were created by Feanor, one of the most legendary of all the elves. He crafted them from some of the essence of the 2 trees of Valinor, also known as the Trees of the Valar. These 2 trees, one gold and one silver, were the central source of light and life in Valinor, almost like the sun and the moon. The gem contained elements of the light and power of the 2 trees and became highly coveted by friends and foes of the elves. This led to the War of the Jewels during the First Age, when Morgoth took the jewels for himself. And those are the events that shaped much, if not most, of the fate of Middle-earth in the ages that followed. But that wraps up our list. Let us know if you're liking the new Rings of Power series and if you'd like to see more Lord of the Rings content in the future. And that brings today's episode to a close. If you enjoyed this episode, check out this one right here. And if you like all of our content, like, subscribe, and comment. It helps us out. But other than that, I'll see you next time when I talk about all things comics.